If you remember casually dressed Vegeta, Goku, and absolutely destroying your analog sticks with the beam struggle, then you grew up playing Dragon Ball Z Budokai. But which one? Because there were 3 games in the mainline series, and in this video we're going to compare each of them. It's no secret that the Dragon Ball franchise was incredibly popular during its initial run in Japan, and naturally this came with all the expected merchandise like toys, children's eye drops, and a heap of video games. But by 97 the franchise was over, and Toei Animation, the company behind the franchise, was moving on to the next thing. What they didn't realize was that only a few years later Dragon Ball would have a huge resurgence due to its localization in the West. And so Toei, along with its new partners, decided to restart the merchandising machine, which is how us kids in the West ended up getting Krillin with a machine gun, Dende with his 2 balls, and of course a bunch of new video games. 2002 saw the release of 3 new handheld games, but Toei also realized they needed a proper 3D console fighting game in time for the holidays, and their last attempt at one 5 years earlier wasn't exactly great. The task of developing the next-gen Dragon Ball fighting game fell to Dimps, a new developer specializing in big franchise spin-offs and anime games. And so in November of 2002 they released the first Budokai game. The game opens with an in-engine recreation of the first DBZ opening, and this is definitely the strongest aspect of the first game. Not only are the cutscenes incredibly faithful to the source material, the campaign mode has over an hour of them as they faithfully retell the Saiyan, Frieza, and Cell arcs. Now yes, the cel-shaded art style that would go on to be present in most other Dragon Ball games is notably absent here, but I don't really mind this approach. After all, this was the first time a Dragon Ball game was developed for the 6th generation of consoles, so we should expect some trial and error. Funny enough, the GameCube port of this game, released a year later, did actually cel-shade the character models, but they didn't actually have the outlines present in the 2nd and 3rd game. And speaking of presentation, I think it's important to note the context in which this game was released. By winter of 2002, the US and UK run of Dragon Ball Z was deep into the Buu arc, and Budokai 1 ended its campaign at the Cell arc. Now, the American game cover reflected this, however it seemed like the UK publishers were scared that kids wouldn't buy the game if it didn't have the current iteration of the thing they were watching on the box, which is how we ended up getting this wonderful cover with Buu Saga Vegeta and Spopovich for some reason. The back is even worse. Piccolo, who's huge for some reason, is the only character who's properly in the game. The Great Saiyaman is a bonus unlockable. Even as a 10-year-old, I remember looking at this cover and thinking this was some bullshit. Also, the European version of this game did not get dubbed. Our game was in Japanese with subtitles. Alright, enough ranting, let's talk about the game itself. And this being a fighting game, the combat is of course a key element. And looking back at it now, the combat is quite basic in this one. It's not terrible like Final Bout, there's just not a lot of depth to it. It's responsive enough, you've got your punches and kicks and key blasts with a few special moves thrown in. The skills are managed via a capsule system, which is nice because it does add a bit of customization to the characters. Plus you get transformations, which are very nice, but the characters who have them end up being incredibly overpowered compared to those that don't. Just like in the show. The campaign is pretty standard, you go from one battle to the next, unlocking capsules and watching these nice cutscenes. Oh, looks like Cell's had a rough night out. Speaking of poor Cell, the campaign obviously ends with a cinematic showdown between him and Gohan, who just keeps punching poor Cell in the gentleman's area. Now I know why he has that black section in between his legs, it's a groin cup. There are also 3 what-if bonus chapters at the end of each campaign section. We've got the one where Vegeta turns Super Saiyan early, where Frieza gets immortality, and the one where Cell accidentally absorbs Krillin and ends up becoming this abomination. This game also has the most original and morbid minigame in all of Dragon Ball. The goal here is simple, get hit by the special beam cannon. So basically, if you don't die, you fail. In addition to the campaign, you've got your typical fighting game modes like Duel, Tournament, and Training. The only other standout mode here is the Legend of Hercule, which is a retelling of the Cell games where the champ takes on everyone one at a time. It's a nice Easter egg from the developers, and you can definitely tell that Hercule/Mr. Satan was a developer favorite. Not only did they give him a jetpack and his own transformation, but he has a unique and very elaborate special move. Here you go, Yamcha, it's DS, a red one, now die. I'm the champion of the world! And of course you can't cover Budokai 1 without mentioning the funky alternative outfits. We've got Goku and Vegeta on Dress Down Friday, Stripper Piccolo, aka Nail, Turkish restaurant singer Zarbon in both regular and ugly transformation, and in my opinion the weirdest of them all, Nappa with more clothes on. Something about it just looks so wrong. And so that was the original Budokai. The game got average reviews from critics, but ended up shipping a whopping 3.5 million copies, making it the best-selling Dragon Ball game worldwide up to that point, which of course meant that exactly 1 year later we got a sequel. This time around we got this great 2D opening straight from Toei, and a kick-ass song from the legend himself, Hironobu Kageyama. Well, the Americans didn't. For some reason he was replaced with a guitar melody in the US version. This opening is great, but I never understood why does Goku have to blow up the moon? RIP Boss Rabbit. Both the character and level designs have been completely reworked to fit this new cel-shaded art style. The base combat is pretty much the same with a few quality of life adjustments like move shortcuts and an overall faster flow. This game also makes better use of the 3D environments by giving the special moves a bit more of that over-the-top shonen oomph. Plus the special moves now have these basic quick time sequences. Budokai 2 does go up to the end of the Buu arc and includes many of the characters, variants, moves, and transformations from that part of the anime. The game still relies on the capsule system, which has been expanded to include the absorption and fusion moves, and this is where the developers had some fun. In addition to all the canon forms you'd expect, you also get some fun ones like Goku and a bunch of random Buu absorptions. The campaign mode has been completely reworked. All the cutscenes from the first game have been completely replaced with this Dragon World board game. It's pretty basic really. Your team of characters just have to chase the bad guys around the map and beat them up. You can unlock and dig up capsules and new characters. The maps also change to loosely follow the plot of the anime, but that's about it. It's a novel idea, but having to fight the same characters 5 times in a row does get tedious pretty quick. Budokai 2 is very much the odd entry in the series. It's not as memorable as the first game and lacks a lot of the polish and features of the third game. And speaking of which, Budokai 3 would be released on PlayStation 2 in November of 2004, and this one also starts with another great animated opening. And while we're on the subject of music, I think the original soundtrack for all 3 of these games is superb. Yes, I know the composer was notorious for borrowing ideas from other musicians, but god damn it sounded so good. Okay, but what about the game itself? Well, in his interview with Game Informer, the series producer Daisuke Uchiyama revealed that he had a vision for the trilogy, create the first one from scratch, evolve the second, and complete the series by the third. And Budokai 3 is definitely the most complete of the 3 games. We've got more characters, more stages, more moves, more transformations, but the game mechanics also received an overhaul. The new key and transformation systems, in addition to the improved dodging and teleport counters, both gave more depth to the combat and brought it closer to the fast-paced action of the anime. And speaking of which, this time around the game really leans deep into its over-the-top roots with the ultimate attacks. And I've always wondered how many DualShock 2s have been ruined thanks to this game's beam struggle feature and the Cyberman growing minigame on the loading screen. It's nice that all 3 Budokais had loading screen minigames, but this one was definitely the most addictive. The new edition of Hyper Mode and Dragon Rush did end up being quite divisive, with some fans arguing that it slowed down the pace of the combat and turned it into a quick-time button bash fest. Budokai 3 would also further expand its roster by including characters from the original Dragon Ball, GT, and the movies with new abilities and movesets to match, like the Gogeta Fusion and the Frieza Cooler Spaceship, which was bullshit because it essentially meant you had to fight them twice, and we all had that one friend who would always use that capsule. The campaign has once again been completely reworked into the Dragon Ball Universe mode, which consists of 11 playable characters, each with their own story mode, which has them flying around the world map, getting into battles, and collecting items. And I always love that they used Toriyama's official maps and filled them with all sorts of little details. Look, there's Guru's house, there's Frieza's spaceship, there's the village full of dead Namekians, although you can quickly tell that all of the developers' time was spent on making the map, because most of the actual story is told through static character sprites over Bob Ross paintings. But I still think I prefer this over the board game. Plus, the developers did add a bunch of cool Easter eggs and bonuses into this mode, like the ability to fight secret characters depending on the choices you make in the campaign. Budokai 3 was the only game in the trilogy not to get a GameCube port. It did, however, get a second enhanced version here in the West, which had characters and costumes unique to the Japanese release. release. And so there we have it, the original Budokai Trilogy. In the span of just 3 years, the series went from an average tie-in stocking stuffer with cool cutscenes to a sleek, fast-paced fighter with true gameplay depth and an impressive roster. But I think what made this trilogy extra special is that these games were the companion pieces to our journey as Dragon Ball fans in the early 2000s. I'm sure just like me, many of you would come home from school, watch the latest episode of Dragon Ball Z on Toonami, and then rush to your PlayStation 2 or GameCube to try and replay those battles. Budokai 1 and 3 would be upscaled and released as part of the HD collection in 2012, with a new, less plagiarizing soundtrack. The series would technically continue past the third game with a number of spin-offs, while the torch of Dragon Ball flagship games would be carried on by the Budokai Tenkaichi Trilogy. And if you'd like to see me cover any of those games in future videos, then please let me know. In the meantime, please leave a comment below with your thoughts and memories of the original Budokai Trilogy. How many DualShock 2s did you break? And which was your favorite in the trilogy? As always, thanks for watching, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to all my existing patrons. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.